Hello and welcome back to Oh So Retro and to part 2 of my monster Voodoo3 build. If you haven't seen the first part of the series where I went over all of the parts in the system and I did the actual build, then be sure to check that out by clicking the link in the top corner of the screen now. But for the second part of the series, I thought it would be fun to see just how well this machine handles some games from the time period. So the original idea behind this PC was to build something that would have been very high-end and very expensive in early 1999. However, the rate at which PC technology was moving at the time also meant that this machine would have been nearly obsolete by as soon as the end of that same year. Just as an example, the 450MHz Pentium 3 processor in this computer was released towards the end of February 1999. However, by the end of 1999 there were already 700MHz processors available from AMD, and Intel's new Coppermine Pentium 3 processors were not far behind, with the promise of speeds of 1 GHz or faster already on the horizon. Similarly, the Voodoo3 graphics card in this computer would have been absolutely trounced by the GeForce 256 from October of 1999. So this monster Voodoo3 build of mine really would have had quite a short useful life. With that in mind, I thought it would be interesting to look at a few games that would have been popular around that time, just to see how well this very expensive machine would have been able to handle them. I've not restricted myself to 1999 though. I have chosen games from a year or two before 1999, as well as a year or two after. And I've also chosen games from multiple genres. We have some first-person shooters in here, some driving games, a flight sim, a couple of strategy games. So I think this is a nice mix of titles to make sure we give this machine a proper good workout and see just how well a top-notch PC from early 1999 could game. Starting us off easily, we have Half-Life from 1998. This game uses a modified Quake 1 engine, I think, and it also supports 3DFX's Glide API, which gives the Voodoo3 a nice advantage.
Good morning and welcome to the Black Mesa Transit System. This automated train is provided for the security and convenience of the Black Mesa Research Facility personnel.
And as you can see, this machine runs the game very well indeed, even at 1024x768. Although at this resolution it's not quite as fluid and as smooth as I was hoping for, and I do still notice the occasional frame drop from time to time. But overall, this would have been a really great machine to experience Half-Life on.
If you have not yet submitted your identity to the retinal clearance system, you must report to Black Mesa personnel for processing before you'll be permitted into the high security branch of the transit system.
Next is Need for Speed 3, which also comes from 1998 and also has fairly low system requirements, so it should play really nicely on this computer.
3, 2, 1, go!
And indeed it does, even on 1024x768 again. It also looks really nice running on the Voodoo3, and the game has support for Creative's environmental audio extensions, or EAX, which were new to the Sound Blaster 5.1 line of cards, which I have installed in this machine. That, combined with the Cambridge audio system here, means that this game sounds even better than it looks on this setup. And while I'm on the subject of these Cambridge speakers, EAX and the Sound Blaster 5.1, it would be remiss of me not to mention just how much of a difference these things actually make to the gaming experience, especially the speakers. These 5.1 Cambridge Soundworks speakers would have been pretty expensive back in the day, selling for around $100 US. But if you could afford them, then they are totally worth it. The way the sound from these things fill the room is unlike anything I've ever experienced on the PC before. Unfortunately, it's impossible to capture the quality of the sound these things actually make, and even though I did the best with the equipment that I have, it still pales in comparison to the real thing, so you're just gonna have to take my word for it. These speakers are amazing. And I'm only using them in 3.1 mode. I don't even have the rear speakers connected up due to a lack of space. And also, I'm just playing a MIDI file here. This isn't even CD quality audio or anything, which just goes to show how good the Sound Blaster's MIDI synthesizer is. To my ear, it's every bit as good as a standalone module like the Roland SC55 from a few years before. But even though I could spend ages listening to MIDI files on this system, and I did, I think it's time we got back to the games and tried something that really puts all of this great sound hardware to a more practical use, like our next game, SimCity 3000. Here, the combination of the Sound Blaster Live Gold, the environmental audio and the Cambridge speaker system is pretty much audio heaven. It's just goosebump-inducingly good, and I could happily sit for hours on end and listen to the funky new age and smooth jazz soundtrack composed by the immensely talented Jerry Martin as it wafts out of this amazing sound system. Other than the sound, the game itself also runs quite well on this system, although I saw quite a bit of screen tearing when scrolling around, which is odd because VSync is enabled for both Glide and Direct3D in the drivers, so I don't really know what's going on here. But anyway, that's not enough to ruin the experience, and SimCity 3000 is perfectly playable on this machine. Next up, we have Homeworld. Released towards the end of 1999, Homeworld was an amazing new take on the real-time strategy genre, which managed to combine a gripping and emotional story with groundbreaking for the time full 3D technology, allowing players to feel truly immersed in the vast loneliness of hostile space.
All stations green. You got it. Phase 8, 9, and 10 sealed. Scaffold decks A, B, C secure. All systems green. What a beautiful sight.
There really aren't enough good things one can say about Homeworld, but I'll save that for another time. For the purposes of this video, the main thing we're interested in is how well this machine can run the game, which was definitely one of the more demanding titles of 1999 when it came to system requirements.
Command online. Resourcing online. Construction online. Cryogenic subsections A through J online.
Luckily though, this machine is more than up to the task, and the game runs really nicely.
Stand by release control. The mothership has cleared the scaffold. We are away.
So far, this machine has been doing pretty well in all the games I've tried, so I thought I would throw something a bit more challenging at it, in the form of TOCA 2 touring cars from late 1998. which you can immediately tell by this amazing drum and bass intro music. Ah, is there anything more 90s than that intro? Anyway, back to the game. Back in the day, I was a big fan of racing sims, and this was one of my favorites due to its advanced driving physics and damage modeling, plus it had the ability to drive real cars on real tracks. It's a great game, but it is very demanding on both the player and the system, and I think here we are starting to see the limits of either the Voodoo3 or this 450MHz P3, because even though this game has relatively modest system requirements, I found myself having to drop the resolution down to 800 by 600 in order to get frame rates that I was happy with. So this game could definitely benefit from either a faster processor or a faster graphics card. Sticking with the racing theme, next up is Need for Speed Porsche Unleashed, or Porsche 2000 as it was called here. This is a slightly later game which was released in, you guessed it, the year 2000. And even though this game also has relatively low system requirements, which are not actually that much higher than something like Need for Speed High Stakes from the year before, the performance on this machine really wasn't that brilliant.
3, 2, 1, go!
I had to turn the resolution down to 800 by 600 again to get somewhat decent frame rates, but even then I wouldn't exactly call it smooth. Maybe the Voodoo3 is struggling here, or maybe we just have different standards these days for what is an acceptable frame rate in a fast-paced game like this. Next, I thought I'd slow things down a bit and try something a little bit different. And that something is Red Baron 3D from 1998. The first Red Baron was one of my absolute favorite games back in the early 90s, and it began a lifelong fascination and love for First World War aviation and history in general that I still have to this day. So naturally, when the creatively named sequel to Red Baron 2, was released in 1997, I immediately went out and bought it, no questions asked. A 3D accelerator patch was then released about a year later in 1998, adding support for 3DFX cards through Glide, and this is the version of the game that I'm showing here today. I really did enjoy getting reacquainted with this game after all this time, and it brought back many happy memories. I mean, I must have spent hundreds of hours playing this over the years, and it's something I'm planning on getting back to in the near future, maybe even for a future video on the channel. And when I do, I think this machine will be a great machine to play it on again, because unsurprisingly, given the fact that this is an older game meant for slower hardware, the game runs pretty much perfectly on this computer. Staying with slower paced games, but switching strategies again to RPGs, we have Diablo II. Even though this is a later title from mid-2000, it doesn't seem to be very demanding and runs quite nicely on this machine. Although again I found 800 by 600 to be the sweet spot for frame rates, 1024 by 768 just felt a little bit sluggish. One game which I found very surprising in terms of its performance was Dungeon Keeper 2. Unlike the first Dungeon Keeper, the sequel has support for 3D hardware acceleration and supposedly supports everything from all the 3D effects Voodoo's, their rendition Verite, Nvidia's TNT, and even S3's Savage 3D. But I can't imagine the game being very playable on most of those because on the Voodoo3, which is one of the fastest cards in that bunch, the game felt pretty sluggish, and I again had to drop the resolution down to 800 by 600 to get decent speed, which is odd because this machine is way above the minimum system requirements for this game.
The guard room. Drop your creatures here to keep them lively and alert, thence ready for the fight. The flashing area which surrounds it marks the zone where any brush with trouble by your creatures will give cause for them to dash back and report, so reinforcements can be found. Make sure there's adequate provision for your minions' needs nearby, for though they are on guard, they still require their creature comforts, and it's wise to minimize the time they stray from duty.
But anyway, this video is getting a bit long and I think you guys get the idea, so I'm going to start to wrap things up. There were quite a few other games from the time period which I also tested for this video, such as Quake 3, Aliens vs Predator, and even Black and White, which was released in 2001, long after this computer would have been considered outdated. And it actually handled it pretty well, all things considered. And so, as you can see, this machine is pretty damn good at late 90s gaming, which I would hope would be the case, considering how much something like this would have cost at the time. I must say though that I was slightly surprised and a little bit disappointed that this system couldn't really run games at 1024 by 768, which before doing this build I would have expected given the specs. It seems either the 450MHz Pentium 3 or the Voodoo3 just isn't quite up to the task, and 800 by 600 seemed a much more comfortable resolution for this system. I think maybe I should just throw in something like the 650 Pentium 3 and see if that makes a difference. Maybe in a future video. One area though where this machine really did blow me away was the sound. I've never really been much of an audiophile, but after experiencing the sound this system could produce, I think that may be changing. These Cambridge Audio Work speakers were just amazing for gaming, especially when combined with that Sound Blaster Live and a game that supports EAX or Dolby Digital. It's just pure magic. One final game that I do want to show before I wrap up is DeathKarz by little-known publisher Melbourne House. This is a futuristic racing game in the vein of Roll Cage, which I discovered while digging through some loose CDs, and it turned out to be a really great little arcade racer, which looks really brilliant on the Voodoo3. If you want an example of why we still love Voodoo graphics after all this time, this is it. But anyway, that's pretty much going to be it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, I really appreciate it. And let me know in the comments below what you thought of this machine's gaming performance, and if it's more or less what you expected it would be. But until next time, cheers guys.